Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest has been a licensed psychotherapist in private practice for 25 years. He is also an award-winning author and retreat leader. In the 90s, he was one of the first people to introduce neurolinguistic programming to audiences in Japan. Early in his career, he focused on brief therapy, but over time his emphasis shifted, and now he coaches people interested in resolving existential issues, finding meaning and purpose in their lives, and reducing anxiety associated with feeling alone and living with uncertainty. He is a game changer and expert in consciousness reassignment, developing a healthy ego, relationships, and authenticity. He and his wife, Hannah, have created books, online courses, retreats, and programs. Welcome to the show, Jake Eagle.
Good to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I got your bio sent over and I looked at a lifetime of work and I was like, yes, this is going to be great. And also early days of NLP, which is fascinating because I was looking at it and it was still relatively new there. So I'm excited to get into this. And just for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a little background on just who you are? And we'll dive into all the amazing stuff you're working on.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, yeah, it was interesting to listen to you read my bio, sort of seeing it from a distance. But I think the short overview is that for the last 25 years, I've been a psychotherapist working out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's where my wife, Hannah, and I have lived for a long time. And then a year ago, we moved here. I'm in Hawaii now. And the move has brought about some significant changes in my work. For those 25 years when I was doing therapy, my approach was a little bit unusual because I would do 1 or 2 sessions a day, but a session was 3.5 hours. And I would work with people maybe once a month. And the idea was, this is the latter part of my professional life. The idea was to do very deep work with people, really substantial, deep work, not have people dependent on seeing me on a weekly basis. And I thought the work was very profound. I had a good reputation. I had a lot of clients, so I thought everything was great. And I was pleased with what I was doing. And I still feel pretty good about it. But then I went through this shift. We moved to Hawaii. And an unusual thing happens. I don't know if this has ever happened for you, but if you disorient yourself enough in your life, if you wake up in a place where you've never been before, you don't know anybody, you have no reputation, you don't know how to get anything done, you're just not connected. All of a sudden, there's an opportunity, a window where we can see ourselves and our lives really clearly. It's like a fresh take. And that's what happened when we came here. And so I stopped and I realized that part of the reason we moved is because there was some, I wouldn't say dissatisfaction with where we were before, but there was something was missing, right? Life was great. We had a beautiful home. I got a gorgeous wife. I have a nice practice. She has a practice. She's a homeopath, but something was missing. So we moved here and I realized that my instinct is to go do what I've always done before to make my life the way it used to be. Start advertising, go out, do free workshops, create a practice, do the kind of work that I've got a reputation doing. But I realized that I'd done that for many years and something was missing. So I decided I'm not going to do what I've always done before. And what is it that I've always done before? Well, essentially what I've done is whatever it takes to make myself feel secure, safe. I'm a big thinker, so I kind of think my way through problems. So I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try and think my way through the situation. I'm just going to be here, going to open myself up and see what happens. And the result is that I've created a different model, a different way of working with people. And it essentially, I wouldn't say it's anti-therapy, but it's sort of meta-therapy. It's like if you've done a lot of work on yourself, you've been in therapy for a while, you've done some mindfulness training, various things, but you feel like something's missing in your life. I think the problem is more therapy, more self-help stuff is like going faster and faster on the same hamster wheel. And so I wanted to get off that hamster wheel. And the way I talk about this now is that it requires a shift in consciousness. You familiar with that? There's the famous Einstein quote that you won't solve a problem at the same level when you created the problem.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is create a new level at which to work with myself and with other people. And I've been working on this now for about 9 months, and I have seen in myself, in a colleague that I've done it with, and in 30 people who have gone through a beta course that I'm teaching, I've seen the most profound results of anything I've done in the last 25 years. So that's now sort of my passion. That's what I'm really focused on.
Holy smokes, man. Well, now I'm curious. Now I'm curious. As I can give the general question on, anxiety, depression, and even actually touch on suicide, because that's coming up a lot. People don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I know, and I don't know, this is surprising for some people. I'll just share it. When I was in my teens, and a couple times I considered it, not to the point of like, I'm going to off myself and I'm ready to do it. But I considered it, man. It was just like the first time was just like, I'm a teen. And I just am struggling through that. And I'm just like, why am I here? This sucks. I hate life. Right. And this is the maxed out, anxiety, depression that exists. And then, one time was in my early 20s when I was learning about the world and how it worked and all these systems and structures that are not designed for our greatest good. Try to share them with people. They don't give a shit. So then I'm just like really struggling there of just like this darkness. And then that was a time I was like, well, maybe I should just exit this game because this is hard. And I think that people have fragments of anxiety, depression, they're lost and meaningless. So I don't know if you want to go dive as deep as like tackling something like suicide or real severe depression, or just somebody who's just generally anxious, because I think that most people's baseline is at least like 20-30% anxious and uncertain and depressed and stressed. Like I think it's probably higher. So if you could give some feedback on that idea.
Yeah, let's do both. Let's start with the general and then let's do a deeper dive. And I relate to what you're saying. I had the same or similar experience of suicidal thoughts in my early teens at 13, 14, and then again in my early 20s. So let's come back to that because it's an important topic. Generalized anxiety, and I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say it's a lot higher than most people realize, because what we're doing is we're running around all the time trying to distract ourselves from this underlying anxiety, which I think is about 3 things. The first thing it's about is the fact that life is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen today. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And we try to act as if we do know. We try to create certainty in a world that's full of uncertainty. And I think part of the solution is being comfortable with uncertainty. How do you become comfortable with uncertainty? Part of it is learning to be present, learning to be in the moment, learning not to run ahead in our minds and trying to anticipate and prepare for everything that's going to happen, which is easier said than done, but we'll talk about some ideas how to do that. The second thing I think is people have fear of death, which we basically don't talk about in our culture. We just ignore it. We're in denial for the most part. And I think until we develop some relationship with our mortality, some way of coming to terms with the fact that we're mortal, I think that anxiety continues. It doesn't really go away. So the question around, and these are the things that I mean when I talk about existential anxiety. The simple expression that I think is at the heart of the work I'm doing and the conversation we're having is that nothing that happens means anything other than the meaning we give it. And people will argue about this, but I really do believe that nothing that happens means anything other than the meaning we give it. That can freak people out, or it can be incredibly liberating and empowering. Because it means that we choose, we determine the meaning of things. And the more responsibility I take in my life to recognize that I can make meaning in different ways, the more comfortable I become in my own skin. And so that's a lot of what the work that I'm doing is about. So I'm going to segue, I'm going to go sideways and explain the model, and then we can go forward again. So I'll use some props. I'm in Hawaii. There's some mosquitoes here when the wind doesn't blow, so I have some mosquito repellent.
Wait, I don't want to cut you off, but did you say the third thing? Because I didn't know if I missed it. I was taking notes.
So,
Are you going into that?
Yeah, we're going to come there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But keep me on track. Yeah. So the general approach to psychology for a long time, 100 years, is that there are certain events that happen in life, certain stimulus, and then we respond. And most therapy, most personal development work is focused on how we respond, teaching us to have better responses. And that's really valuable stuff to do. And it's what I've been doing for 25 years, helping people work with how do you make meaning of this event that occurs? How do you interpret it? That's cognitive therapy. And then what's your response? So maybe I can teach you to have better boundaries. That's a way of responding. Maybe I can teach you to have better communication skills. That's another way to respond. Maybe I can teach you how to individuate from your parents. That's going to mean you'll have a different response to whatever the stimulus is. Good stuff. But here's the thing. If we come before over here, before the stimulus ever arises, and we realize that there's a state of consciousness that I'm in before any event occurs, and that largely predetermines how I respond. So my state of consciousness as I go through my day largely determines how I respond to anything that happens. And you and I are doing the show, and we did like a 10, 15-second meditation before we went on air, and you said, let's set our intention, right? To me, that was a way of adjusting our consciousness. And when I talk about consciousness, I'm talking about our state of mind, our state of being. We took 15 seconds, we kind of adjust our state of consciousness, we come into the show with an intention. That's going to influence the quality of our show, our relationship, the way we work together, our conversation. So my work now is about helping people understand that there are different levels of consciousness. We can choose which one we're in almost all the time. Short of a tiger jumping out of the woods and chasing me, then I have no choice. I just go into my primitive brain. But short of that kind of dramatic threat, I can choose what state of consciousness I'm in. And what I've done is I've created a very simple model to say that there's 3 states of consciousness. Is that true? No, it's made up. But it's very useful. It's very useful. So the first state of consciousness I refer to as safety consciousness. Safety consciousness is where I spend most of my time. It's about making myself safe, creating good boundaries, getting stuff done, being productive, taking care of business. It's where I live most of the time, or I have for 60 years, and it's very valuable. It's also very tiring. It takes a lot of effort to live in safety consciousness. Second state of consciousness is what I call heart consciousness. Heart consciousness is very simply a state of profound appreciation and gratitude. It's experiencing love that isn't dependent on another person. It's not romantic love. It's just simply love. I'm looking around at the trees and the sky and the grass that I'm surrounded by, the beauty that I'm surrounded by, and I just take myself into a state of deep appreciation. And as I do that, I shift my consciousness. I open myself up. In that state, I'm less reactive. I actually have less internal dialogue. I slow down. You may notice just in my speech pattern, as soon as I take myself there, I slow down. This is a different way of being in the world. And what I've come to learn in the last year is that I can live most of the time in a state of heart consciousness. And I believe that most people can. And by the way, this isn't new to people. Like, we've all been here. We all experience it, right? It's just, I'm not sure that we wake up and think, oh, I can be in heart consciousness today. It's a choice. But I believe we can do that. The third level or state of consciousness I call spaciousness, spacious consciousness. It's a state that comes about through a contemplative practice like meditation or mindfulness. It's a state of tremendous expansiveness, timelessness, wordlessness, not talking. That's why it's hard to describe. But I'm going to circle all the way back now. But when I spend some time in spacious consciousness, my anxiety around death decreases dramatically. Because I become comfortable with this remarkable expansiveness, which in many ways is akin to how we think of death. It's just this vast unknown. So if I can become comfortable in this state, I kind of call it a state of suspension. And there's other pieces to spacious consciousness. I begin to relax around my own mortality. If I can go into heart consciousness, I begin to relax around many of the issues that I was anxious about when I was in safety consciousness. Because when I'm in safety consciousness, I'm measuring, I'm comparing, I'm making judgments. And I'm not judgmental about that. That's fine. It's okay to do that. There are times we need to. But a great deal of the time, I don't need to be doing those things. All of those things create anxiety. As soon as I start thinking, hey, how am I doing in this interview? How's my performance? How am I, right? I'll make myself anxious. Where if I'm just here with you and I keep my heart open and I'm in a state of gratitude for where I am, for the fact that I'm getting to know you a little bit, the fact that we're both doing cool work, I just relax. There is no need to make judgments or comparisons. And so to me, working with states of consciousness is a profound way to resolve significant issues that create anxiety. And I was going to say, I haven't really heard other people talk about it this way. I know there's a lot out there right now about mindfulness, but my concern about a lot of that work is that it isn't giving people something practical enough to work with constantly throughout the day. And so that's one of the things that I'm really interested in. So I want to stop talking, kind of check in, see where this is at for you, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I would just agree with what you're saying, and I think that it's very interesting. I kind of see sometimes like the survival state, right? And we're out there and we're afraid, and so we're not really functioning at a higher state. We can't relax. I see it all from a sports perspective, where it's very immediate, and you must be able to perform at the highest level. But day to day, you're not really like addressing how you're feeling. Because it's not an immediate thing where, like in snowboarding, if you're going to try a double backflip and you're stressed out and you're all wonky, you could seriously hurt yourself. So you have this like immediate check. But because when we live our daily lives, we don't have this immediate check, we have this kind of slow compounding thing that we do to ourselves that we feel like is our normal operating system, because we weren't taught how to kind of check in. Like the one point that you made, just the ability to realize that you can choose your state of consciousness. It's insane that people don't believe that. And sometimes I forget, and I'm in this mindfulness. I'm having wonderful conversations with you, and I'll go through a whole day and I'll just stress. I'm like, oh man, that was, okay, cool. Tomorrow, got to remember that I can actually choose that, and so they're simple, but they're really powerful. And I would love for you to continue.
Well, one of the things you talk about with intense sport activities, I find those to be fascinating because they require such presence. They, to some degree, the choice is taken out in that situation, don't you think? It's like you have to be there, right?
Yeah, we have the athlete that's doing something dangerous has a necessity to do this. And you can take that, once you realize that, then you can take that out into your daily life, into other things.
Yeah. And the question for some athletes that do intense sports is, can they have that level of presence and awareness in the mundane, right? Like I used to know a guy who was a skydive instructor, and he took me out the first time I ever jumped out of a plane. And this guy, if he wasn't doing something intense, he was dysfunctional. It's like he needed something to really bring him present. But boy, when you got him in a plane or a situation that really required attention, he was fantastic. But he needed that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting in athletes because there's a big thing with athletes as well where they become a professional athlete or Olympic athlete, and then they're like, what do I do now? I had this thing that I was laser focused on. I learned how to, maximize my potential and what I'm capable of. But now I don't have any kind of meaning or purpose. Who am I? Because they've attached their purpose to that goal that they've acquired. And it could have been achieving a gold medal or an NBA championship or a double backflip on your snowboard. And so it's funny because I see this balance, and that's kind of like my theme with Zen Athlete is being whole, happy, harmonious, full of self-love, and miss the game-winning shot, get it or what, because that doesn't define you. It's just an expression of you. And so you can teeter back and forth, and it really is about that balance and understanding the tools and techniques, what you're capable of and where you want to use them, but ultimately guiding your life and your state of consciousness through this experience. And you touched on something really wonderful right away, just about the feeling of uncertainty. We live in uncertainty, and we can give ourselves a worthy mission or idea, something that we would like to work towards that gives us meaning, right? And then we attach that meaning, and that's our choice. And so it's this balance of these elements. If we can somehow weave them together, because it's not all one or all the other, it's kind of exploring our states of consciousness, what we're attaching meaning to, and taking that inventory within ourselves, and then having tools to move forward.
Right.
So yeah, please go.
And it's also, you brought up a valuable point. It's also not about being in one state of consciousness all the time. To me, the key is fluidity. It's the ability to move in and out of states of consciousness. There are times where I want to be in safety consciousness. It's really appropriate. Then there are times where I absolutely don't want to be. And the other thing that you just said reminded me, this idea about making a choice and setting an intention. I mean, my wife and I have this great, very simple technique we use, which is anytime there's tension in our relating, hopefully one of us will very quickly recognize it and say, what do you want to have happen in the next 5 minutes? And the point is, it's bringing intention to the next 5 minutes. If you don't do that, there's all this uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. We might have a fight. It could get ugly. I don't know what, but we treat our relationship as if it's very precious. And so we bring this intention all the time. And if the anxiety level or uncertainty or conflict starts to rise, then that's when we say, what do you want to have happen? Do you want to connect? Do you want to fight? Do you want space? Do you want to take a break? And 9 times out of 10, we say, I want to connect. And fascinating to me is it's about that simple. It's about that simple to remember that that's what we want, and we move toward one another instead of away from one another. So uncertainty is something that is, it can cause anxiety, but as I said earlier, it's also an opportunity for us to shape our reality. We can shape the next 5 minutes, you and I. How do we want it to go? What do you need? Tell me what you need. Maybe I can give it to you, right?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And it really is, I think, that's simple. It's these continuous applications of a simple process. And so what I'm curious about is if you wanted to dive deeper into some of the course that you've made, because doing psychotherapy for 25 years gives you just an extraordinary amount of experience. Plus you're pursuing NLP and teaching NLP. And for me, listening to you speak already, I know you're at this level of mastery. When I was studying it on my own, I had a bone to pick with therapists because I never understood how somebody would come to you for years and years and years, and you're not getting to the bottom of the problem. I was like, then you suck at your profession, because that person can't be that broken. We need to figure out ways to support each other And so your idea and thinking about it is just, is such a beautiful concept. It's very well-rounded and you have immense experience. So I'm very curious about this new process that you've developed to go even deeper, because, I've done a lot of studying and seen mindfulness and all these different things, but your level of mastery far exceeds mine.
Well, the point you make about people being in therapy for a long time suggests a lack of competence on the part of the therapist. That's how I heard it. Is something I would agree with. And it isn't that the therapist isn't good at what they do. It's not that they're not skilled. It's that they stay at the level of safety consciousness. And the primary focus with safety consciousness is to solve a problem. That's what it is. So this is what happened to me 9 months ago. I wake up, I'm in Hawaii. I'm feeling pretty insecure because I don't know anybody. I have no reputation. Things are kind of difficult. I wake up in the morning. It's this gorgeous day. Hannah's getting dressed. I look at her. She's beautiful. Look outside. I'm going, am I thrilled to be alive? I thought, no, I'm not. What the hell's wrong? What am I doing? I'm waking up every day trying to solve a problem that I don't actually have. My problem is that I think I have to solve a problem. My problem is that I'm not appreciating what I have. My problem is that I'm not celebrating life. And I started asking this question every day, am I thrilled to be alive? And 3, 4, or 5 days into it, I started going, hey, I am thrilled to be alive. I am really turned on. And then I was talking to a colleague who also has a great life. And I said to him, are you thrilled to be alive? And he said, I don't know. I never thought about it. He said, I'm appreciative, or I'm content, I guess. So he and I entered into this 21-day program because there's a myth that in 21 days you can change a habit. It's actually not true. You can change a habit really quickly. It doesn't take 21 days. A funny side story. I had a client once who came to me because he wanted to quit smoking. He wanted me to do an NLP cure. And I said, well, I can do that. And he was a really wealthy guy. I said, I can do that, or we can make a bet. And he said, what's the bet? And I said, the bet is that you're going to smoke, or you're going to have to give $10,000 to my favorite charity. I said, you up for that? And he was the kind of guy who's like really a risk taker. So he said, wait a minute, you're saying if I smoke, I have to pay $10,000 to your favorite charity? And I said, yeah. I said, you can't give it to me. That would be unethical, right? So he said, okay, I'm up for it. And 3 days later, he wrote a check to the charity. So I said, you want to do it again? There is some amount of money that will get your attention and you won't smoke, but I don't know what that amount of money is. You want to do it again? I said, let's do it again. Let's do $25,000. And so he hesitated. He kind of caught his breath. And I thought, okay, this is going to work. This is going to work. He's not going to smoke. And he never smoked again. And it was that instant recognition about what was really important to him, right? What were his values? So I believe that we can change our habits incredibly quickly. That was a tangent. What I started to tell you about was the fact that I did this 21-day program with a colleague of mine. His name's Mike. And for 21 days, we would write each other an email basically saying either we were thrilled to be alive and why, or what was getting in our way. And it was really profound. I mean, at the end of the 21 days, he had radically changed his relationship with his wife. He had probably the best 3 weeks of his life, is how he described it. I was also really doing well, but he kind of took off. He was like a jet. And that's, by the way, that's how I developed this course. This beta course I'm teaching is 21 days. I haven't been charging for it. I just get 10 people. We get together once a week on a Zoom conference call, and they buddy up. And they work with their buddy for 21 days. And once a week, we get together and I do some coaching. But it's all about answering this question, are you thrilled to be alive? And when I first started the course, I had all these screening mechanisms, like if you have serious major depression, if you're in serious ongoing pain, if you're dealing with a life-threatening illness, then I don't recommend you do the course, because I didn't want anybody to have a really good excuse why they weren't thrilled to be alive. But since I've been doing it, the criteria to join have gone down. Now people who have terminal illnesses are joining the class. Because the point is, you still can be thrilled today with the life you have. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that people don't have problems. I don't want to come across as being cavalier. People do have problems. But what I determined when I did this with Mike is that we have problems, but that doesn't mean that we need to suffer. And that to me is this huge distinction. I do have some problems. I do have some challenges in my life, but I don't have to suffer. And so this is, from my point of view, it's a radically different way to approach doing therapy with people. Now, I'm still working with people, and my approach has changed so that when people come in, essentially what I'm doing is I'm asking them if they want to pay attention to the big picture of their life, get in touch with the beauty, the wonder, the love, or if they want to spend the next hour focused on the problem. And it's interesting how many people will say, I want to focus on the problem. And then I go, I'm not really the therapist for you. That's not really what I want to do. And not only that, but I don't want to even validate that it's a problem. I don't want to validate that it's a cause for suffering. And that's what a lot of therapy is. It's validating people's pain.
Okay. So I'm curious. All right. So let's say, well, some people, like you said, they have problems, right? And am I thrilled to be alive? You know, which is interesting timing on the podcast. I find sometimes it's a reflection of what I'm going through. And I was at Shokai training with David Lone Bear. So Shokai is the ancient karate martial arts type of thing. And it's very interesting. Just a whole process around it and things like that. And I show up and I'm like, you know, I'm not happy right now. I don't know why. Well, I kind of know why. But it's like this idea in my, and I've had to kind of process this in my own life. You know, I was like, okay, I've got the podcast thing. I've got this an athlete thing I'm trying to get out. I'm trying to earn a living. I'm trying to travel around. I'm trying to learn from David. I'm just like overwhelmed, you know, and I'm losing zest, and I have so much. So I'm just like, what the heck? So this is good timing. So how do we get to the point where we are thrilled to be alive? And if we have a real problem, or like, you know, you're stressed about a job, I usually, if I'm coaching people, I'll say, you know, the 99% of the time it's not a problem. It's your perception of the problem. You know what I mean? But I think there's a movie quote. It's not your problem. It's you're thinking of the problem or whatever, because it's just is, and they'll find a solution, and you can frame it differently to give you so much more peace and ease. And I believe that's what you're speaking of. So maybe you can dive deeper into some of the process. How do we get to being thrilled to be alive? And if we want to walk somebody out from really deep anxiety, depression, even to the point of suicide, if we want to go that route, or any way, I'll just kind of feed that back.
Okay, so two things. One is sometimes people have a problem and we need to dig in and come up with a solution. So what is it that's going on in your life that keeps you from experiencing zest? I mean, what's in the way?
Just overworking myself, I think.
And overworking yourself by choice, or
Yeah, just, you know, doing more content. There's, you know, as the podcast grows, it's all me. And so as I do one thing, there's what I call secondary tasks. It's like this explosion of secondary tasks that I need to do. So in my mind, I see all of this stuff that I can do and want to do, and I'm excited to do. And I'm kind of bogged down, you know, and the more I do, the more work I create for myself. But it also, these beautiful things that I'd also like to create, I don't have time for them. And so, you know, I caught myself maybe a few months ago when this started happening, was just like, just be happy. I was like, oh my God, I didn't do anything today. And I recorded 2 new podcasts. I edited a podcast. I did a coaching call. And I felt like I did nothing because in my mind, I had the idea of the other thing I wanted to do.
This is great, right? I love it. I mean, here's a guy who, as capable and bright and as fully as you live your life, you'll victimize yourself, right? You'll set it up where you become a victim of your own creation, your own circumstances. And then you tire yourself, and the zest drains away. So the first thing is to see that you're doing it to yourself. I think it's a really common dynamic for highly competent overachievers. I mean, I relate to it. I can tell you the 5 books that I want to write and how I could frustrate myself because I'm working on one and I want to be doing 4 others. And I distract myself with that. But that's not being present. It's not really being in the moment. And it's really a waste. And what I would suggest is that if you accessed heart consciousness and you thought about the same issue, it would look completely different to you. And so if you go into a state of appreciating your life, which is pretty cool, I think, and appreciating the options that you have, and one of the things you have that a lot of people don't have is this sort of remarkable degree of health and athleticism, which is really easy to appreciate, I think, right?
Yeah.
So you go into that, you have anybody in your life love you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You love anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see the beauty around?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you feel the energy in your spine? Are you able to connect with the energy rising in your spine, rising from your sacrum, coming up into your heart center? Can you do that?
Yep.
Yeah. A lot of people need to practice, but my sense of you is you've done a lot of work and you probably have that ability to work with your energy. So you bring the energy into your heart center. Feel that difference, feel that shift, and think about what you are describing to me as a problem or a lack of zest. And what are you aware of?
Well, just peace and ease. Yeah. It's interesting because sometimes it's funny when you'll tell somebody to do something and then, one of the tricks that I'll do is either, place the consciousness in their heart with the issue. There's even a heart experience I bring people to where I hypnotize them into their heart. And then we look at the problem from that space with the heart's intelligence. We get the brain to take a break. And then the nice reminder, and the reason why I bring myself up for an example is because you can see that it's a process. That you can perceive someone outside of you, because I've heard this on my podcast before. Some of the stuff people write me, it's just like, oh, you must be this and that. I was like, part of the reason why I've been studying this thing for my whole life is because I'm all messed up. Just like I'm trying to unfilter my own brain and get to this space of peace, consciousness, enlightenment, or whatever. And it's a daily process, and to just understand that and to be kind with yourself in the journey. And it's that reminder of going into the heart, and it's simple. Another one that I'll use would be like taking in 3 deep breaths, but I'll make them hold their breath. And then in that process, I was like, what did you think about the problem? But they're just focused on their breath. So right, I appreciate the simplicity of that.
And I caution you, I mean, I understand why you say things like, I've been doing this my whole life. Why? It's not that I'm exceptional. It's that I'm all messed up and I've been trying to find answers. I appreciate that, in that people will relate to it. But I also caution you about referring to yourself as all messed up, because that to me is like a safety consciousness description. I get it. But this is an example of how I'm working with people now. I won't validate it. I won't let you say it and go along with it, because I feel that if I do that, it's not respectful to who you are or how I hold you. I mean, I don't see you as messed up. I understand you may have certain insecurities. I have them too, or I have my own. But I don't want to support people talking about themselves as all messed up. People come to me and they'll say, oh, so-and-so did such and such. They humiliated me. And I'll say, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think anybody can humiliate you. You can humiliate yourself, but I don't think another person can humiliate you. And so I'm just being super intentional about not validating the ways that people live unconsciously in safety consciousness. And it's a great practice, by the way. It's a super mindfulness practice for me, right? So I think you would enjoy it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. You remind me of my first mentor, Michael Lozier, who wrote the book, The Law of Attraction. And you're just not getting anything past him. And this is something that, doing the work of voice outside of myself. And so also to be mindful of the voices inside. And if they're saying the same thing, and if they are, to nip them in the butt and allow those to not exist, and bring the truth of the matter together, where even if you're saying it in jest or whatever, it's not a true thing, or to relate, or for whatever reason you're giving yourself to say that. So it's appreciated.
And even these ideas, we have this model, like you just said, the voices in our head. We have this idea, and there's a whole thing in NLP about parts, that we have different parts and different voices. And these are tools that have been very effective in working with people. But I'm questioning all of these. People are coming in. I'm supervising therapists who will come in and they'll say, well, I have this part that sabotages me. And I go, I don't know. I believe in the parts model anymore. Really go to the core and tell me what's going on. And see if you can connect with how fortunate you are to be alive. I don't care what's going on. I mean, I'm working with a woman who's dealing with a terminal illness right now, and she's remarkably capable of accessing the awe of being alive, regardless of what's going on. Now, the only exception to that I found is when people are in pretty bad pain. It seems that's probably the greatest challenge I've encountered. When people have a lot of pain or they're medicated, it seems really much harder for them to work with their consciousness. But short of that, I'm kind of not cutting people slack. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think I like it. For me, in the way that I do it or process it, is it's a reminder. So if I do that, it's easy, and then I'm back in. Just sometimes, as of recent, I had to recheck myself because I had forgotten to do the simple things and come back to the joy. And that's really how simple it is.
Yeah, there's another thing for you that strikes me, which is for you to be doing the work you're doing and not be connected with the zest. It means that the work is going to be slightly incongruent. And so it's like you're not bringing your best to the table. And I think I'm going to make an assumption about you that you have a commitment to do that and you believe in doing that. So if you're not able to do that, then I think you have a responsibility to step back and say, what am I doing? How am I holding myself back? And this to me is a very interesting point, because we just come to a fork in the road. How am I holding myself back? And we could go down the fork of safety consciousness and say, what is the problem? What is my limitation? What is the belief that's holding me back? We may need to do that. Or we could say, am I paying attention to how extraordinary my life is? Do I need to remind myself? Do I need somebody to remind me? And by the way, that was the point of the buddy system in the course that I developed. The buddy is there not to validate you, not to witness you. The buddy has only one job, which is to remind you that you're incredibly fortunate. And in the beginning of the course, you fill out a form, and it basically, you kind of go down through this checklist and you just check off all the things that are positive in your life, or many of them that are positive in your life. That's all your buddy knows about you. Like, that's all they know. They don't know what you do. They don't know who you are. They just know that you have people you love. You have people who love you. You're fundamentally healthy. You have enough money that you're okay. You can eat today, whatever. That's all they know. And that's their job, is to remind you. It's like, keep this in perspective. It's an interesting way to work.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. And for me personally, it's easy when I remember. Sometimes not so much. So I do have a spectacular life. I am really fortunate. And I really like the way that you're framing it, because I agree with it. Now, what in the process, let's just say, I guess it would work the same, just people either like when we touched on severely depressed, anxious, or they have a lot of stuff going in their life and maybe it's really hard. Do you apply the exact same process to it?
Fundamentally, I do, with one difference, which is I think that depression, other than severe depression, which, you know, could require medication, but short of that, the vast majority of depression is the result of a lack of hope. It's about not having a clear sense of a compelling future. And so if somebody doesn't have a clear sense of a compelling future, to me, that's something that we can really help them develop. And that can be done as a combination of safety consciousness, like really pragmatic. What do you need to do? You know, to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Do you need to go to school? Do you need to learn new skills? We can figure that out, map it out. That's safety consciousness. Then at the same time, I want to bring heart consciousness in and say, realize your ability to think this through, recognize the choices you have, understand that this is pretty much up to you. I mean, there may be some obstacles, but it's pretty much up to you. So I'm working in tandem when people are dealing with depression or despair. Safety, heart, safety, heart. What I don't want to do is I don't want to get caught up just going into safety, because I believe it exacerbates the depression. It's hard. It's difficult. I have people come in all the time and they're saying things like, you know, well, I mean, the example, you know, it's hard to change a habit. It's like, well, maybe, maybe not. I have couples all the time who say, you know, this is how we've treated each other forever. And it takes a lot of work to change behaviors, and we're going to just chip away at it. And when I hear people say like that, I tell them, it ain't going to happen. You're not going to bring about this change by chipping away at it. You bring about this change if you leave here today and you stop doing what you've always been doing. And I don't mean to sound Pollyannish. I don't mean to sound naive. I just have very high expectations of what we're capable of doing. And the people who buy into that, the people who try it, they wake up. It's like, well, maybe this doesn't have to be that hard. So that's a little bit about depression. And it also depends a little bit on the age. So you and I talked before about teenage depression, and I think teenage depression is unique because I think there's a big hormonal piece going on. And so with teenage depression, I think that it's not just a matter of talking through it. I think we have to help teenagers have really a few things. They have to have great role models. And because role models will give them hope and give them a picture of what's possible. And I also think we have to help them find ways to soothe themselves, which most teenagers don't know how to do. They don't have healthy ways to soothe themselves. The single best way generally has to do with exercise. Not for everybody, but if I were to generalize, I would say it has to do with exercise. The other thing, which is really kind of cool when you think about this, Matt, is that if we were teaching the stuff you and I are talking about today, if we were teaching this to kids when they were 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you wouldn't see nearly the level of teenage depression and suicide that we see. It comes from powerlessness. And it also comes from a very challenging time where we're trying to individuate from our parents. So I've got to go out in the world and figure out who I am, but nobody told me how to do that. There's no guidelines.
Nope, I was taking notes. I wasn't sure if we were going to continue. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that these fundamentals of understanding our consciousness are super important to be given to the youth. And, you know, the Zen Athlete thing, the book, the reason why I did that was because to disguise it in sport, these principles, so they don't even know that they're learning them. You know, if we can get them in through sport, through youth, through the coaches, then they have them their whole life.
Yep.
And they're simple. You know, all these things, the thing is, it's not complicated, it's simple. Like when you talk about somebody quitting smoking or making a change or having a relationship, or even, you know, with what we did together, it's just like drop the story, you know, in even that thing, or whatever the thing is that you're putting into the pot and identifying with and believing, it's around a belief that you can stop instantly. And then you just have, you know, you in this circumstance being on the other side, but the reality and the truth is it can be dropped. And that's a new belief that we can take, and we can take a new action right now. Like if you're struggling with quitting smoking, don't put the cigarette in your mouth. But why is it so hard to do that? It's the whole storyboard around that. I was just curious if you wanted, I don't know if you can dive deeper into like some of that process that you're working with people, because a lot of people, well, you can go, I'll just throw some things at you and you can kind of choose what you want. A lot of what's out there, we're talking about awakening, talking about enlightenment. We're talking about spiritual practices. We're talking about multidimensional experiences and being fulfilled and, you know, and having this awakening consciousness of the new age. Right. And I think that those are all real to a degree, and some of it can get a little bit skewed and even more disconnected from yourself, I think. And then this is just a question that I want to ask at the beginning, but you have a big background in relationships, and then it's a bit separate, but if you wanted to guide people out there who are in relationships, in marriages or whatever, some key fundamentals to great communication, whether it's relationship or in business, I feel like you'd have a lot to offer.
Well, that's a really hot topic. So let's go there for a little while. I think the key to me for people having great relationships is it's about taking responsibility for our own emotional lives, our own emotional well-being. And what we tend to do is we tend to blame other people for our emotional states. So the work that Hannah and I do in our retreats is teaching people a different way to language themselves, a different way to use language. It comes from two of our mentors. About 20 years ago, we met an elderly couple. They were 85 at the time. Their names were John and Joyce Weir. And they had developed a different way of using language. They called it percept, from the word perception. And we ended up studying with them for 6 years, and then we took over the body of work, and we do these retreats a couple times a year. And people come together. We usually have groups of 20. We go some really beautiful place. We do a lot of experiential activities, and then we sit around and we talk about them, but we do it using language in a different way. And a few of the things I can share with you that I think people can adopt very quickly. One is we almost exclusively talk about what's happening now. So, for example, Hannah and I, we don't really talk anymore about who did what last weekend, or what happened, or who forgot to close the car door, right? It's, what do you need now? Right now, like in this minute, what do you need? What would make you feel better? What would allow us to connect? This eliminates a huge amount of wasted time. Because when we talk about what happened last weekend, for one, we both have different perceptions, and neither of us, you know, all we're going to do is try to make the other one wrong. So we just don't go there. The second thing we do is we change our linguistics from saying things like, well, I gave you an example before, you know, I could say, I was talking to so-and-so last night and they humiliated me. But we don't do that. We'd say, I humiliated myself. You don't make me angry. I anger myself. You don't disappoint me. I disappoint myself. Other people don't do these things to me. They don't run my nervous system. I do. So it kind of goes back to what I started with early when I was holding up these bottles and I was saying there's a stimulus and there's a response. Well, there is a stimulus. You may say something, but how I respond is really largely up to me. It's my responsibility. And so if I can change the way I talk, I start to remind myself, this is up to me. This is my responsibility. I do have a choice. And I remember you earlier in our conversation, you were saying the key thing for me is remembering. And the reason I like using language, the reason I like changing language is because we use it all day long. So all day long, I get to remind myself when I say things like, I don't say things like, it's difficult. I say, I'm making this difficult. I don't say things like, it's boring. I say, I'm boring myself. I'm doing this to myself. And as soon as I say that, I take ownership, I take responsibility, and that gives me a sense of empowerment and choice. So in relationships, I feel like this is really key, to take greater responsibility for our own emotional well-being. And I'll say one more thing about it, which is I'm a big believer in the need to individuate. And in our culture, we don't have any rituals for individuating. And individuating means to become our own person. And first we need to separate from our parents or our primary caregivers. And then later in life, we typically need to individuate from our partners. And sometimes we need to individuate from our kids or help them individuate from us. But we don't have any guidelines about how to do this. And the key piece is to recognize that we're separate. So if we can recognize that we're separate, which means to pull apart, and then to turn toward one another. That's the key, is to turn toward, not to turn away. These to me are very practical, useful ways of improving our relationships. And I'm a big believer in things being practical and useful. And you mentioned before, there's a lot out there about awakening and enlightenment, and I don't use the word enlightenment. I talk about enlightening ourselves. It's a verb. It's an activity. It's something I have to do. It's not a state I get to and I'm done. But my point about these things, awakening ourselves, enlightening ourselves, practicing mindfulness, I think they're all very powerful and useful. But I also think many of them lack a practical application. Like, how do I do this with my partner? And that's a big part of what our focus is on. Before I was a therapist, I ran companies for 16 years. I was a business person. And I think it's part of where I get this kind of pragmatic approach to working with people.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree with all that. I really like the last bit of enlightenment as enlightening ourselves and it being an active, continuous state. I guess I'd ask, like, maybe for some of those tools, if you have any, or and then the other questions I'm going to ask, I think is really important in relationships to take responsibility for yourself. But we have two other scenarios. Let's say you run a business and your employees they're literally not doing something. You're in a relationship, and say the man is an alcoholic and he's not playing, he's like dismissive, and he's not, he's doing things that they make you feel a way because they're never at home, and they're doing something. Or kids, right? And then that's a whole nother bag of chips. So just wondering, could throw that back in the pot and get your general advice.
So you've touched on three: employees, kids, and say an abusive spouse. So the abusive spouse, the thing there is that I make a choice whether I allow you to behave in that way and I stick around or not. One of the things we teach I call it dating, relating, mating. It's a course. And one of the things I say in it, in the very beginning where you're just dating somebody, I said the key to being successful in romantic relationships is to learn to be intolerant. Intolerant. And people kind of go, what are you talking about? Everybody says you're supposed to develop tolerance. And I go, well, tolerance is like once you've decided to live together and you're a happy couple. But in the beginning, you want to be intolerant. You want to give somebody information when they behave in a way that doesn't work for you. And then when they do it again, you want to say, hey, I told you that doesn't work for me. And the third time, I kind of do the 1, 2, 3, and you're out. And what it does is it eliminates a lot of the situations you're describing where you are with a partner and the partner's behaving really inappropriately. Now, it's a little more complicated if you've been with the person for 20 years and you've been tolerating their baloney for 20 years. But I'm a big believer in saying that has to stop, and intolerance is appropriate. So that's the romantic relationship. With kids, it's a matter of transferring responsibility to the kids. The earlier we do it, in my opinion, the better. Not before the age of 7, but around the age of 7, we can start transferring responsibility to them. So instead of having them look to us to determine how they feel or whether they did good or bad, I want to encourage, like I do with our grandson, I want to encourage him to look to himself. You tell me, how do you feel? You tell me, do you think it was good or not? Our grandson used to come and spend the weekends with us, and he always said he felt the safest when he was with us. And I think it's because we never told him anything about himself. We never told him how he felt. We never told him who he was. We always asked him to tell us. And he really got in touch with himself when he spent time with us. And then the third one, employees, is an interesting situation because the owner of the company, the boss, does actually have more power. It is an unequal relationship. I've done a lot of work in organizations, and the only way I've ever been successful is when the owner or the leader of the organization was really very committed to creating an enlightening organization. And that's very rare. For the most part, I think it's a lot of talk that leaders speak, but when it comes down to it, they're still measuring things based on dollars and performance. And the talk about empowering people and having an egalitarian organization, I see very few organizations that really embody that. I have worked for a few that do, but it's not common. And if you have more specific questions about these things, I'm happy to go there too.
Yeah, those were all really great feedback. I just think it's like the common themes of what we're dealing with on a daily life. I'm just kind of thinking about the average person who's got a kid and then they got to go to a job. Then they might have, people that are really negative and hard to deal with, and since you're really good at communication, just dealing with challenging people in general. And then, so anything you wanted to add there? And then the only other thing that I would say is you talked a lot about, tools and processes. If you're educating a teen, a youth, an adult, what are some of your favorite practices or tools to feel better, to feel more thrilled, more alive, to have a beautiful, expansive life? That's kind of the whole thing of the podcast and my own pursuit, is how do I have a magical, amazing existence? And when I look at it, I am proud. I have done a lot of that, and it's been just continuous problem solving of how to do these things. How do I get over here? How do I do, right? And it's fun and it's challenging and all these different things. But understanding the consciousness piece of it is really the ultimate mastery, to be able to have that peace and security and fulfillment anywhere, no matter what. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to go to the mountains. You don't need to go snowboarding on a cliff. You don't need to go do anything. You can have that level of peace. And you've done a lot of work in that field. So I'll just kind of throw that back and ask for your advice and best tips, which you've already shared a lot, by the way. Tons of amazing stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, the idea of sort of being thrilled regardless of what's going on around you. Somebody asked me what sort of my goal is in life, and I said it's to live in an open-hearted way regardless of what's happening around me. I'm not able to do that all the time, but it is something that I believe is possible. And I believe it's a combination of 2 or 3 things. I think it's certain skills, like you and I are talking about, communication skills, being able to work with my mind and bring myself back to the present. I think it's developing emotional maturity. And what I mean by that is that anything can be expressed in two ways. Anything can be expressed in an immature way or a mature way. And so if I can learn, no matter what it is that I need to say, if I can say it in a mature way, I think I'm going to help myself tremendously. I also believe anything can be said in a kind way. I don't think there's anything that I can't say in a kind way. Doesn't matter what it is. There was a third piece. I'm not sure if I remember what it was, but it's a little bit of this idea of being realistic. So I want to recognize what I need to do realistically to feel good about myself. A minute ago, you used the word proud, and I love that because I don't hear many people talk about being proud. They're afraid to say they're proud because they think it suggests they've got an ego, which, first of all, we all have one. Second of all, I think that we should celebrate our egos and stop trying to escape them. I don't talk as much about ego as I do about identity. And when we first started the conversation, I said there were three causes of anxiety. One had to do with our impermanence, the fact that we're mortal. Second one had to do with the fact that we live in an uncertain world. And the third one has to do with what I call our identity, and that we get confused when people challenge us. They're not challenging our physical being. It's not threatening to our survival. All they're doing is they're challenging our identity. They're challenging my idea of who I am. That's it. That's it. My idea isn't going to die. It doesn't ever get destroyed, I suppose, until I die. It's incredibly malleable and adaptive. And so if I relax around, realize we're just talking about my identity. It's an idea of who I am. If I recognize that, my anxiety level drops tremendously. And a lot of the work that we see people doing in the New Age community is very critical of the ego. It's like I have to get rid of my ego. And I think that's unrealistic. And so that's what I meant a couple minutes ago when I said I think we need to be realistic about what we're doing. There's certain things I need to feel secure and comfortable in my life, in my existence. What are they? Go do them. You know, they're really kind of basic things. And that's, by the way, what happened when we moved here is these things that I had been doing forever that created a sense of security, they were gone, right? I used to work with 10 or 12 people a week. I made a certain amount of money. I had a certain reputation. Then we came here and I had none of those things. And so that's when I had to stop and reevaluate, well, what do I need to do to feel safe and secure? That's one side of it. And then the other side is, what do I do to appreciate everything I already have? That's the other side.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, I like that. I really like the pragmatic approach, because I think that what's happening now in what I'm seeing out there in the conversations that I'm having and the research is that there's a lot, and but once you get to a level of looking at it all, it kind of filters down to principles, and then your ability to apply those simple principles. And then I was just going to touch a little bit on ego and identity. If you wanted to go deeper in that, the way that I've kind of phrased it, because I have a similar approach, is we all have an ego of who we are. When you look at a kid, you want them to be who they are. The ego or identity is their preferences, it's their joys, it's their passions, it's their, how they want to express this human existence. And we want that maximized and as unique and fully expressed and permission to go for it. That's your identity, because that's a part of you. The challenge of the ego is when you're doing things to create a mask. That's where I think where the challenge comes in. But those are two separate things. You're kind of like acting in a certain way, and like, let's say high school bro being tougher, right, or whatever, and you're acting in a certain way that's not authentically you. That's, I feel like the ego part, where we start to change this mask a little bit. But there's like that essence of who you are. And I feel like that's the real ego and identity. And I don't know if you have similar thoughts or if you wanted to kind of, give people a 101 on what maybe healthy identity is, or however you would teach it.
Well, the part I'm smiling about is the word authentic. I always get irritate people with this because I had a guy I was working with, and he comes in with his wife, and she's critical of him, and then he lashes out at her in my office, and then he says, "I'm sorry, sweetie, that wasn't my authentic self." And I called BS on him. I said, sure, that's your authentic self. You can be a pompous ass at times. That's part of who you are. Don't pretend you're some wonderful guy all the time. You got a great heart. You're patient and loving. I said, you can be a real SOB. And it's part of who you are. Take responsibility for it. Don't deny it by saying that's not my authentic self. You're an authentic SOB at times. Right? So it's this thing, I want people to take responsibility for how they behave, regardless of how it is. And one of the keys to doing this, Matt, is the idea in our work, we talk about the fact that there's no praise and there's no blame. So we're not critical of people when they behave immaturely. We just want them to take responsibility and own it. We're all going to make missteps along the way. But I think when people say, well, I made a misstep because that wasn't my authentic self, they're kind of skirting around their own lack of development. They're skirting around their own immaturity. I'm big on accountability.
Yep.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. One of the things I've talked about enlightenment before, and I was trying to figure out like characteristics of what I thought an enlightened person was. I had these different characteristics, and one of them was 100% responsibility, for their way of being, for their action. And I think that's where you can kind of go when you go a bit into the woo-woo. They talk about the shadow work, it's not all this beautiful stuff, it's like integrating all that. And if there's something, if you are being an SOB and you don't want to be, then stop doing that. Then you cannot be an SOB. You can work on that, but you first got to kind of take responsibility for that process. And what you're sharing is all very direct, simple. Anybody can understand it, and it's powerful. It doesn't need to be complicated. I feel like a lot of people, we're going into this stage where it needs to be complicated, and you have to do this massive ceremony, and everything's got to be just right. And I love the woo-woo stuff. I do, because I get in there and I kind of see what it's about. But at the end of the day, there's these really real core principles that after that process, how are you acting and doing? Has it changed anything? And that, even the consistent reminder of, am I thrilled to be alive today? Is so wonderful, with the most basic protocol of having a check, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's why I have a coach, and that's why I work with people, because I'm like, you just sometimes need a check, because I'll be pissing around because I get distracted, and I will just, so I have this nice lineup, and you have just a simple check of am I being thrilled today? So, or am I thrilled at life? And it's wonderful and simple.
Am I thrilling myself?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I love it. And it's, it's this idea of like, why not? We have this existence. Why are we not living in this way? That's what confuses me about the way that I can observe the world and how people live in it and perceive it. It's just like, this is really a miracle to be alive. We want to go in these multidimensional states and this, out of this world stuff, but like, we're here now in this body. We are in the miracle. You just got to take some time to, smell the roses, but then I'll give you the ideas that all come in. The safety consciousness is, I need money to provide for my family for this and that. And then we've got the jobs, and then we got to go to a job. We don't want to go to the job because we want to be here and there. So I'm just going to feed that back. And then how do you just got to keep coming back to that. Am I thrilled even though I got to go to this job that gives kids food and shelter, even though I don't like, and then just start to guide towards what I prefer? It's kind of where I'm at.
I don't know if this is true. I think that if you can't do the vast majority of things that you need to do in your life for safety consciousness, if you can't do them in heart consciousness, then you're probably living the wrong life. Now, you say, well, I got to go to work at the post office. I mean, are you suggesting I should do that in heart consciousness? Yeah, I am. Could I do it in heart consciousness? I don't know. Don't have to do that. But I'm the chairman of a board of a company, and I've found being on the board to be very challenging. It's a contentious group of people with big egos. And so I was telling my buddy 6 months ago, I was making an excuse. He was saying, "How you doing? Are you thrilled to be alive?" And I said, "Well, I'm in safety consciousness because I have to run a board meeting this afternoon. It's a big meeting. There's a lot at stake." And he was saying, "Hey, man, that's a bunch of baloney. You can go in there and you can run that meeting in heart consciousness, and you'll get better results, and you know it." I'm not buying it. And then I said to him, "Yeah, well, there's also a lot at stake financially and a lot on the line for me personally." He said, "Nah." He said, "I don't buy that either." He said, "You stay in heart consciousness, you make more money than if you're in safety consciousness, particularly at this stage in your life." And I really got it. I really caught myself. It was like, God, I can't believe I'm making excuses for myself, but I was. So I got into the right frame of mind. I went into the board meeting, ran it in heart consciousness, best board meeting I've run, got the results, and I've run every board meeting since then in the same way. And I just think we make excuses for why we fall back to these habitual ways of being that we learned when we were very young, and maybe we didn't have the skill or the know-how. But I'm at a different place in my life. You're at a place in your life where I wouldn't give you any excuses. How old are you?
34.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're doing with your life. I think it's fantastic. I wouldn't give you any excuses. I would just say, you can do the things that I understand you want to do. You can do them with a really beautiful blend of safety consciousness and heart consciousness that will, I think, be inspiring. And if you say, well, here's a situation where I can't do it, my inclination would be to challenge that. And, we may stumble upon something where there's an actual reason why you can't stay in heart consciousness. Maybe there's a particular skill set you don't have. And if we came upon that, okay, then we understand you need to go and you need to develop a particular skill set. And that would be a safety consciousness necessity, right? But in general, I'm a really big believer in holding high expectations. It's a funny paradox, right? Because it's holding high expectations, but then not measuring yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that. That's a compliment. And it reminds me of martial arts. The training that I did with the Shaolin masters was so different than the training I did at the professional MMA camp, because one idea was kick the crap out of each other, technical fighting. And for me, that's not the whole spirit of martial arts and why I did it. And that's why I needed to go to China. I was so excited about that. And one of the main things that I learned was that I was capable of so much more than I pushed my own self to get to. There's this person not allowing you any excuse to, set your bar where it is. You think your bar is here. Well, it's way beyond. And I think that's similar to what you're doing. And I'm thinking of a practical step for anybody listening to this, if they listen to this podcast, to buddy up and to do that, right? That's one practical thing, and not to give them an out, right? And even earlier in the podcast, I'm like, oh crap, I'm getting psychotherapy, which is good. I like that because I always want to see, like, I enjoy it. I want to go deep and be like, you know what, that is true. Like, just let it go, right? And if I bring it up, if I fail, don't beat myself up for it, right? But it's just like, get it out. Thank you for showing me that, right? And then you teaching it and then doing it to yourself, and you try to sell it, right? You try to sell it once to your buddy, and he's just like, nope, not buying it. Then you try to sell it over here. He's like, nah, and you're like, damn it. Right. And then you go in and do it, and it becomes, the experience you want. And just for clarity, let's say we're going to the post office, going about our daily lives. How do we get into the heart consciousness? Just drop into the heart and imagine ourselves in our heart before, or?
Well, what I use, and I think it's either available on our website or I'll make it available, but I use a simple meditation. It's about a 10 or 15-minute meditation I do daily, where and posture is key to this, and you probably understand it really well, but posture is key to moving the energy in our spine. And what happens for most of us is the energy in our spine is pretty stagnant. It only moves sort of the bare minimum. And what I believe we want to do, and what I've learned to do in the last couple of years, is learn to create great fluidity, where I can move the energy from the base of my spine up into my heart center, and then also up into the top of my head. And the more I do that, the more fluid I become emotionally as well, and spiritually. And so I really believe it's important to have a practice where we're sitting with good posture. And I can do this if I'm standing in a line in a grocery store now. Working with that energy, learning to move it, bringing it up into my heart, creating a state in which I'm fully appreciative. And there are two ways to talk about that. I can make a list of all the things I'm appreciative of, which is kind of a cerebral way of doing it. Or I can get in touch with the state of appreciation, the state of gratitude. I don't have to tick off all the things. That's okay. But there's a deeper level of gratitude, which is simply an awareness. As you said before, it's an awareness of the miracle of being. And you can see it even when I do it with you. As soon as I open to that, I shift into a different state. And when I'm in this state, the littlest thing can be a source of great joy. So I can go work at the post office. I can go flip burgers. And the way I relate with people, or the way that I experience my own body, can be a source of great joy, can be a source of great presence. And I'm a big believer in not using force in life, but presence. So most of my life, I used force to make things happen. And at this stage in my life, my intention is to use presence. And what happens as a result of that is always appropriate. If I come to a situation, I bring myself fully to that situation with my core values. Whatever unfolds will be appropriate.
I like that. That's beautiful. I think that we're kind of taught, especially as men, to use force.
Yeah.
You know, when we can use presence, and that's when you can get out of your own way. That's when they'll talk about flow state or spirit coming in or whatever, because you're adaptable and you're in the moment and you're trusting in your body and who you are and everything, and you're not, you know, trying to jam a square peg into a round hole or something like that. And
right.
Go ahead.
No, and it has all sorts of consequences when we jam a square peg into a round hole, because we then live with that, the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that has kind of made me think about, because there's simple things, and, you know, kindness, compassion, and happiness is really what I've been learning with this native elder. And they're the three fundamental star teachings, and they're so simple. And when I listen to him speak about it, or listen to the groups of people, or have people like you on the podcast, or exploring my existence, why are we so shitty to ourselves? Do you know where like this idea came from? Like, you know, you look at people and like, if we could be so loving, so kind, so supportive, so compassionate to ourselves, just as we are, to give ourselves full permission just to be ourselves without judging ourselves and all the crap that goes along with it. You know, when you see like a, you know, 4-year-old girl or a little kid, they're not thinking about any of that. They're really expressing life. And when you see somebody doing that, it's beautiful and it's amazing. And you see how they're free. And it's interesting, as a culture, it doesn't seem to be the norm. And I'm just curious from your research, if you have any just words of wisdom on that idea.
Well, I think that it's a huge cultural meme and part of our evolution that I think we've gotten way off track. I think this is what I'm challenging around psychotherapy. I think the whole psychotherapeutic model of the last 100 years may be contributing significantly to the problem. People are making all sorts of excuses for their own poor behavior. And it's real important. I want to say two things. One is there are people who have mental illness and they need therapy, and that's a different category than what you and I are talking about. We're talking fundamentally about healthy, high-functioning people who go get therapy or self-help stuff. And that's what I'm challenging, that a lot of that is self-indulgent and narcissistic and becomes a preoccupation instead of living an extraordinary life. I'm preoccupied with why I'm not living an extraordinary life. And then the second thing is that I do think there is value in therapy. I'm actually working on this right now. I'm trying to create a checklist of if somebody were to go to therapy for a year or two and there were these essential 5 things that they need to be a healthy person, what are they? And I think it's worth identifying, saying we all need to have these 5, 7, 9 skills, capabilities. But beyond that, I think that we just spend too much time staring at our navels and making excuses for why we're not thrilled to be alive.
Yeah, 100%. I think we spend so much energy convincing ourselves why we're not supposed to be remarkable, why this life isn't supposed to be extraordinary, why things aren't supposed to be, amazing. If your life isn't that way, a buddy of mine, Charles Clay, was on the podcast and he does something called the vacation vibration. And he is wise. I don't know how he's about my age, like 30, but when I met him at Envision Festival, he's just so glowing and so excited. And I was like, this guy knows what's up. And he teaches people to do the vacation vibration. It's just live life as a vacation. And it's this lens that he's able to put on all things, but you want to be around his presence because it's so much fun, and one just simple thing that he did for me when we were eating, he goes, do you want a vacation vibration in your meal? I was like, yeah, man, of course. And he goes, okay. And he's just like, before you eat, he's just like, just imagine that you're a food connoisseur and you have to like really taste it. So then, and he's like, then use your non-dominant hand so you're more focused and eat like that. And it's just one little tip that I've used now rather than scarfing down my food and things like that. It's similar, but really it goes beyond that to like, why are we selling ourselves that we're not extraordinary? We are such remarkable, multidimensional, amazing, whatever you want to say, capable beings. We look at someone who said like, whoa, look at how smart crows are. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. They are smart. But it's like, look at how amazing you are. And maybe the system that you're in is a bit, we got to problem solve some money stuff. We got to problem solve, like some Koopas that are, lurking at the corner to try and pull you down with their crap. You got to maybe work with a boss or like whatever. These are just small problems that it's just like a dolphin getting pestered by a little tiny thing in the ocean, right? But we're creating a story about why this tiny thing is pulling us down. It's like, no, you're a dolphin. You literally just got to flap a little bit and shoot out. And maybe it's a process. Maybe it's not. I think like some of the listeners are a bit older. Some of them are younger. These kids, they want it now. And it's a process. So if you give yourself 5-year, 10-year window to just, what are your values? What would be an extraordinary, thrilling life for you? What are those elements? A lot of the time, it's a lot simpler than you think, right? So what could you let go of? What could you get more of? And move in that direction with the understanding and knowing that it is possible, and spend time selling yourself why you're remarkable and capable, and less time selling yourself why you're not.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think narrowing is also important, that I think we pursue so many different avenues and so many schools of self-help and development, and people are so fickle. I think find something that works and do it for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, whatever. Really immerse yourself and take advantage of the tools that are out there. I think all the jumping around that people do is often a mistake. We don't get the full advantage out of the programs that are out there.
Yeah. Yep. 100% agree.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, this has been amazing. You've shared so much practical wisdom. I got I got some, and I'm excited to see your work. And I'm just curious, if is there anything that you wish that I asked that you want to talk about? We don't have to shut it down, but if there's something you want to dive deeper in, I'll come with you. Or any last thoughts you want to leave the listeners with, and obviously where they can check out that program.
Two things. One is if people are interested in this 21-day course that I'm doing, they'll find on our homepage, I think there's a place where people can express the fact that they're interested. They fill out a form, and then I get back to them to see if it's a good fit. But I'm still doing those. I do one a month. There's 10 people. There's a waiting list, but it's still open to people, and it's all on either a free or a donation basis. It's kind of my research project right now. So that's one thing. The other thought I had is feedback for you, which is the show is so, it's so open and far-ranging. I think that if you and I were to think about a topic that we might want to go deeper into, we might just do like 20 or 30 minutes on one point. I don't know what that is. But if you get feedback from your viewers about a particular thing that people want more on, we might just do a follow-up segment where we do, like I say, 30 minutes on relationships or something. Because you and I have gone all over the place, and it's been fun. I just wonder if there's something that people are left wanting more of, and if so, let me know.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you kind of put it out there now. When I release the podcast, I'll have a look, and we could also, because we are live on Facebook, I can just take a quick check to see if anybody.
Yeah, cool.
I haven't, when I do the Facebook Live, I don't go right in because, once I go live, I don't look at it because obviously I can't do too many things at once. But if you guys are watching, if there's any one thing that you want Jake to go deeper on, type it in the comments, and I'll have a peek to see if anything's out there.
And for people who are watching, if you wonder what I'm doing when I'm moving around, there's mosquitoes out here, so I'm constantly swatting or spraying. Get any feedback?
The one it says, how long will the high, unquote, bliss last if deep inner child and wounds still exist and are bound to come up the rebound?
That's a fabulous question. So here's the thing, respectfully, deep inner wounds is just a story. It's a myth. It's a whole myth about the wounded child. And I'm not saying, this is really important, I'm not saying that bad things didn't happen. Bad things happen to people. Bad things happen to kids. But the emotions that we have, the primary emotions we have, they have a shelf life of about 60 to 90 seconds. When we feel sad or angry or joy or scared, that lasts about 90 seconds. And the only reason that it goes on for hours or days or decades is because we create a story. And the story creates what are called secondary emotions. Those secondary emotions will keep a difficult childhood event. They will keep it alive for decades. And it really, and I mean this respectfully, it really is unnecessary. And a lot of psychotherapy is feeding the myth that we have to go into our wounded childhood and resolve issues. And there may be some things we need to do. We may need to go and set boundaries with somebody who was once abusive to us. We may need to speak up. But we don't need to spend years and years working on these things. There is a different approach. And the high is not a temporary state. The high, and I'm going to call it the thrill, becomes my baseline. And when I say thrill, it's also important to clarify. I'm not talking about the thrill like I'm on a roller coaster. The word thrill, the original meaning of the word thrill was to pierce or to penetrate. Okay, to pierce or to penetrate, like to wake up. So what we're piercing and penetrating is what one of my students called the chaotic buzz of disingenuous living. I want to pierce and penetrate the chaotic buzz of disingenuous living so that I can live all the time in heart consciousness. And that's not a high. That becomes the norm. It's a great question. The last group I did, I had a psychotherapist in it, and she would come to the Monday evening session with me and the nine other people, and she would feel great. And then on Thursday, she would go see her psychotherapist, and she would kind of crash. And I said to her, why don't you stop the psychotherapy for a while and see what happens? And she ended up doing that. She had created structures in her life. And I tell people at the end of the course, you may have to dismantle some of the structures in your life, because we put a lot of structures in place that encourage us to live in safety consciousness, to constantly question ourselves, to look for explanations as to why we're not happy. We have to dismantle many of those if we want to live as full a life as what Matt and I are talking about.
Yeah, 100% resonate with that answer. And I feel the same way. And when I was talking about therapy and things like that, that was literally the same conclusion that I came to, that you're reframing and then confirming the problem, and reliving it and reliving it and reliving it. But you're not really, finding a solution. I'll give you one more question. I kind of asked for clarity, but it's from Colette, and she says, how to stop being an SOB. And I think that's how to stop being an SOB, get clear about what you hate about yourself.
Yeah. So this to me comes down to describing for yourself the values that you want to live according to. There's a great quote by Rollo May, who is a brilliant therapist, and he said that in every moment where we're relating with people, there are 4 criteria. And if we live according to those 4 criteria, life will naturally unfold beautifully. And if we don't live according to those 4 criteria, then we'll have all sorts of problems. For him, the 4 criteria, and you have to figure out what these are for yourself, but for him, they were honesty, integrity, courage, and love. So he said, if you live every moment of your life when you're relating with honesty, integrity, courage, and love, life will naturally unfold. So my answer to you is 2 parts. One is you have to figure out what those 4 values are for yourself. And 2, you have to hold yourself accountable to the conduct of those behaviors. Then you stop hating yourself.
Simple. Man, I think, you know what I'm going to do with this? I'm going to get like a Q&A when I release the podcast. I'll say, hey, let's get a Q&A going. And as I receive questions, I'd love to have you come back and go into it, because obviously, you know what we're doing and we're bouncing around. And if we get one central theme, then we could dive into that too. But you're obviously a well of depth and wisdom. And I appreciate your feedback, and I appreciate you coming on and all the work that you're doing and sharing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And you give me hope. I love seeing somebody your age doing what you're doing in the world. I find I leave encouraged.
Oh, great, man. Well, I really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. Did you mention where your website is so people could?
I don't think so. liveconscious.com. It's not consciously, it's just liveconscious.com. And people can also reach me by sending emails to jake@liveconscious.com. And I'll always respond. It takes me a few days, but I always get back to people.
Amazing. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you. Enjoy the beautiful day in Hawaii. And
I will.
thanks everybody for watching.
All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.